In that childhood, I did suffer some serious trauma. Uh, the worst being that my mom and dad divorced when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I went to live with my mom right after that with my older brother. There were five of us in the family. I was the youngest, and it was, quite a transition living with my mom. She had her issues, and it was very difficult. One minute she was hot, next minute she was cold. One minute she's yelling and screaming, and next minute she's the most nurturing mother that I could ever imagine. So you can imagine, as a kid, like where do I stand? What do I do? And not knowing right or wrong, all the time. And what might be right today was wrong tomorrow, and it was very inconsistent behavior, and that in itself was traumatic. And then a couple of years later, my mom decided to give custody to my father, and I did not see her after that. And about 5 years later, I was 13. She died of a heart attack. So I never saw my mom after she gave custody to my dad. She was around. Well, I'll say I did see her one time when I was walking to school. I happened to see a taxi cab drive by, and my mother was in the back seat. And I'm like, Dag, that's my mom. I think I don't know, maybe 12 years old. I took a double take. She didn't pull over, nothing. I never saw her after that, didn't call, nothing. But that was the last time I remember seeing her. And so going to live with my father, um, my father was, and I don't talk about this quite as much, but my father was pretty much a functioning alcoholic. And he was there physically for me, and I appreciated him for that. Yet there was a lack of emotional connection with him. He just didn't have it in him. And shortly after my mother passed, within the same year, my oldest brother was killed in an automobile accident. And so the two of those events took its toll on me as a child, as a 13-year-old, in a very prominent developmental stage. And and then it hit my father really hard. His oldest son and his wife, ex-wife, both died in the same year. And I found myself having to parentify him. He was unconsolable. Like I would have to sit with him, and he would talk to me about my mom, and he would talk to me about my brother, and he would sob, and I had to take care of him. And I'm like, and I didn't wasn't aware of it at the time, but what about me? I'm a kid who lost his mom and his brother, and hello. So I had to kind of deal with that all by myself. I didn't really have any support around it. My siblings really didn't understand how to support me. So that was the nature of up until that time. And shortly after that, teenager, I started dating, and my pattern started then, to where I would meet a girl, date, and I would overlap. I would find another girl that I liked, and I would dump the one that I was with and go to the other one. And that was a pattern that I established early on that went into my college years, all the way up through my first marriage. I was a radio personality for 35 years, and man, the women, it was too easy. Here in Philadelphia, they love the radio personalities for some reason, and it's the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. So the sisters were definitely affectionate. And so I was tempted, and yes, I did succumb a few times to that temptation, and I can't say that I'm proud of it, but I just realized at that time in my life that I really was immature. I didn't really belong in a committed relationship. My wife and I at the time, we got along great, no problems. We didn't argue very much. It was just me wanting my cake and eat it too. And I just realized that that was just wrong, and that I had to get out. And on top of that, one of the women I was seeing while I was married ended up being my second wife. So there I go again, overlapping. So this time I married a second person while I was on the radio doing my thing. She had four kids, and then we had a daughter together. And we were together for about 10 years or so. And in that time, I was dealing with some things, some stress of my job. I love my job as a morning show radio host, yet it was very stressful, the stress of kids and everything else. So I decided to go to therapy. And it was then that I realized that I had an abandonment issue. Yeah. And what that means is my mom abandoned me, literally. I mean, she left and then she left for good. She passed away. So there I was with this realization, oh, well, no wonder I overlap these relationships because, well, if she's going to leave me, then I better leave her first because I can't be abandoned, right? And so that made sense of my pattern. So that's when my infidelity stopped. Now, with that relationship, I it was kind of like almost recreating my childhood of five siblings. I had five kids, like we had a family of five. We had a dog. We had the whole nine yards. Big house, 27-room house, man. It was like living the life. And I started noticing issues in my marriage. And excuse me, one of those issues was that I found out that I was controlling. And I had no idea that I was controlling. I felt like I was a good guy, that, why not? I would never admit that I was controlling, and I wasn't aware, but the therapist pointed out to me. And because I was the breadwinner, because I had all the money, or not all the money, but most of it, I had a zero on top of her salary. And I just made all the financial decisions, the decisions around the home. I was just in charge, man. And I didn't do it, feel like I was doing it in a bad way, but I had no idea that my wife felt that way. So that was an issue that I was trying to change. And on top of that, I realized I had the white and shining armor syndrome. That here I was, this successful guy. She was, came from North Philly and four kids, single mom. I'm saving the day. And so I'm here to save her. I'm here to save her kids. And, I'm the hero, right? So those two issues really got in the way. And I'm not here to throw any of my exes under the table. I'm here to take responsibility for me and what happened to me. It might make a more entertaining show if I went there, but that's not my goal. Um, so with that, our marriage ended up dissolving, and I remember my daughter went with her and her four step children or step siblings, and I was alone in that 27-room house, and with an empty living room except for the rug, in the middle of that living room, just bawling, just crying, and in a fetal position because, Terrain, it was the first time in my life that I'd been alone in relationship. And we're talking in my 30s. And that is exactly what I needed. I was so afraid, terrified of being alone. And that's when I started to really work on myself, to be okay with me, to have compassion for myself, for all that I've been through. And I mean, I could tell my story, my tragic childhood story, as if I was telling you about, a night out on the town. Like it didn't really come across as really heartfelt. And that was feedback that I got that I had no idea I was coming across that way because I just kind of compartmentalized it, compressed it, never really dealt with it until later on. And then that's the time I was in therapy. I was going to workshops and traveling and getting trainings in different things. Um, and I ended up getting out of my lucrative radio career to open up my own holistic health practice. And I was still dabbling in radio. I was still there, but not the way I had been before. And I'm a master Tai Chi instructor, and my teacher was living with me at the time, and he was offering classes, and I met this woman in my class. And I'm like, wow, I got a woman that's interested in Tai Chi, and she's interested in me. And we kind of hit it off. And well, guess what? She was married and had a kid. And I'm like, Okay. And I had enough, self-respect at that time to, I really wanted her, and yet I just couldn't deal with, they were like kind of separated, but weren't legally separated, living in the same house. She convinced me that the relationship was done, yet were staying together for the kid, and the kid was like a year and a half or so, toddler maybe. So that was a tough relationship. It was very much a roller coaster relationship, and I had to finally draw the boundary and say, "Hey, once you're divorced and everything is clean, give me a call. I'll see where I am, and let's see where we go." And well, lo and behold, I was available when she did all that, and we got together and eventually got married, had a son, and as things started to get, there was a struggle in the relationship. I said it was a roller coaster. Being married didn't change that, and it was really difficult. And I'll just say that I felt I was losing my identity with her because I think she was more attached to the celebrity guy that I was. I was more attached to the holistic health practitioner, the guy who had changed and grown in personal development and all those things, spiritual development. And I was trying to live up to an identity that she was had of me, and it just wasn't working. And I had to be true to myself. And so that was the end of that. And I ended up uh, in one room in someone's house. That's how far I had gone, and pretty much hit the bottom. And I was like, I'm done with the relationship, man. Like, this is it. I'm gonna go live a monk's life, work on my spiritual development, and and that's it. And so that went on for a little while. And one evening, I was sitting in meditation, and got this strong push, like this spiritual message saying, "It is time," like Rafiki and the Lion King, right? It's like, it is time. I'm like, huh? What? You got to be kidding. And man, I was like, no, no way. And it was so strong. And I'm like, look, dude, I I'm in this one room, in one person's house. We got two kids. They don't even live with me right now. They're living with their stepmother. And oh, by the way, I just got laid off my job. This was during the recession. And I was still doing some other stuff, my holistic stuff, but the radio thing was gone, and my life was at the bottom, man. And this push to be put myself out there on a dating site called Conscious Match, well, I did. The push was that strong, and I felt really weird doing it. 3 days later, after I posted, I get this poke from this woman who was local, because a lot of the pokes were not. They're in Russia or somewhere. And I said, she's only about a half hour away, and she's lovely, and let's see here. And so we started chatting via email. And I tell you, I put it all out there. I told her where I was right away, and she was like, well, at least you believe in marriage, 3 times, man, I can appreciate that. And what she told me was there was something in my eyes, in my picture, that drew me to her, and that she just trusted it. And so after putting out all my dirty laundry, she did the same. We did our values clarification before we even talked on the phone. And finally, we talked on the phone and we had great conversations. And then it was time to meet. And when we finally met in person, the moment my eyes looked at her eyes, what I thought inside and felt inside my heart was, I am home. This is home. And that was over 16 years ago. And I mean, it's just amazing how strong our relationship is. And I'm not just saying that, but I had learned a lot about relationship over those years, what not to do. And I did a lot of training, and I had a mentor that was a relationship counselor. And I knew all the right things, and I started learning these things and how to communicate and be vulnerable and empathetic and all the things we need to do to really make a relationship work. But they weren't working in my previous three. But it was an evolutionary process where with all that and finally got to this relationship, I put it all to use and it worked. It's like, wow, somebody who can receive this and really was starving for that kind of relationship. So that led me to pretty much where I am today, where the past 10 years, I've been a mind-body educator and integrative therapy practitioner at a major health clinic here in Philadelphia. And I have to say, most of my clientele were women. And excuse me, and I would hear the women say all kinds of stuff about their man. And I'm like, well, what if he were to say this, or what if he were to do that? And they were like, yeah, that would make all the difference. And I said, well, that's an easy fix. We can do that, you know. And that's when the light bulb started going off because I'm like, well, I can help these men out here because this is what I had to go through to get to the relationship I really wanted, and I had to learn a few things. And I'll also add, you know, I had to tell the women, well, you know, you could be doing this too, you know, and maybe because he, you know, he may be thinking this or this may be his conditioning, so you may want to understand that. So anyway, with that is just led me to this love mission that I'm on right now, and that's to help men in relationship, help women in relationship, and spread more love and connection in the world. So I hope that wasn't too long of a story, but there you go.
That is absolutely beautiful. And I want to say that there's probably a lot of people who, after one breakup, they don't want to get back into a relationship, but you've had a number of them and you've taken it to the next level where a lot of people don't get marriage. It's the goal for a lot of people, but a lot of people don't get marriage. So as you look back, Bill, after one marriage, two marriage, three marriages, and your history with women, was there ever a point in your life where you asked yourself, is this for me?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, especially after the third. I mean, that's when I was ready to give it all up. Like, forget it. Like, I know all these things, and I've grown, I've personally, spiritually, all these things, and I felt like I've evolved. And now what? You know, it's like, what's the point? And that was just all the experiences, I think, accumulating in my mind, you know, to really distort how I was looking at relationship. And I needed someone that was open to the gifts that I had, you know. And I remember one of my exes. I remember after going to therapy and I would say practice something that the therapist taught us. And she was like, "Well, don't give me that psychobabble bull, bull." And I'm like, "Wait a minute. We both agreed to do this, and we're supposed to be working on this, and I didn't do it as a way of controlling. I was sincerely trying to make these things work. And when you get feedback like that, like, you know, and that's when it occurred to me that, well, maybe it's the person. They have to be open to this and open to a different way of communicating, etc. So yeah, I almost threw in the towel, man. Yeah.
So let me ask you then, what steps would you actually, let me take a step back and ask it this way.
Hmm.
Since you work with men and women and you've helped men because you said that you've gone through this,
Hmm.
how much of yourself do you see in the men that you help?
All the time. And that's how I can really support them. And I know with my personal growth, what always helped me, I had an amazing therapist, and she would always support me some kind of way. Like, well, yeah, I know the part of me, and or give an example of how it showed up in her life. And so when I can do that, like just sharing my story, now I wouldn't, you know, spend 20 minutes telling my story because then that makes the session all about me. I can say, yeah, man, you know, I've been through three marriages and blah, 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 and maybe a paragraph and that's it. So that he goes, oh, damn, he's been through this. He knows what I'm going through. And that's the sole purpose. And man, when we feel supported in what we're going through, it opens us up. It allows us to be vulnerable, to feel safe, to really express what's going on inside. And if you have someone that doesn't have that experience, they might be able to help you on a more of a surface level, right? But to truly know what you may have been through or can relate to what you've been through, that can make all the difference in the world.
So let me ask you then, I guess my next question would be that if I look at it like I'm looking at it from my perspective,
Hmm.
and I had my mother, my father, they were married, but I wasn't around them during my early years.
Hmm.
But there's still a number of people out there that still have very healthy examples of marriage.
Hmm.
And for you now to tell this story, and we talked about this offline a little bit,
Hmm.
there's a number of, and I'll speak from the male perspective, that all they're hearing is marriage bad, marriage bad, marriage bad. Despite that, when they go home, they
Hmm.
have both mother and father in the house,
Yeah.
right? What do you think is the disconnect between, let's say, younger men who have adapted an ideology that marriage is not good despite coming from homes where they see healthy examples of marriage?
Hmm. Well, I think they're more apt to have a healthy relationship when it's modeled for them, right? Um, and I think they're more likely to have success. Now, maybe their peers or, their friends that are going through bad marriages and they see it that way and see it modeled that way, that could scare them off to do it, or hear their male cohort saying, hey, man, don't get married, blah blah blah. I mean, I remember my best man before I got married the first time. He says, "You ready for this?" And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I'm going for it. But when you hear horror stories, it makes you wonder. And with 50% of the people that get married get divorced, at least in this country, it's a 50-50 shot. And so there's not a whole lot of positivity around that. And if you think about like sitcoms and how marriages are portrayed a lot in media, it's not a good thing. It's always, she's the ball and chain or whatever, and it's just portrayed in such a negative light, and then it becomes corny if the relationship is strong and healthy. And so you see a lot more of the unhealthy relationship than you do with the healthy relationship. And then I'll take that as far as to say now with social media, with all the reels and stuff, you'll see that over and over again. So, especially as a young person, if that's what you're exposed to, then chances are that's how you're going to perceive it. And so you're going to go in with a negative attitude.
Growing up, I remember seeing such positive examples to your point, right? Like it was in your face, and there wasn't social media back in the 80s and the 90s, I should say, sorry.
Mhm.
But one thing I've noticed, and I spoke to someone about this the other day, and they were like, bluntly, they're like, well, that's a reflection on the algorithm, right? For the ones who always see the
Right, right.
negativity, right, right. And I'm like, well,
Exactly.
if you're coaching people, you can't say, well, blame your, you know what I mean? But she
Yeah.
was so gun
Yeah.
ho about her, right? She's like, no, blame your algorithm. And then she's like, well, Terry, take a step back and ask yourself, if they're starting at ground zero for the algorithm for everything, right? What is it that they're putting into the search that
Mm.
is triggering this? And I took a step back and I was like, yeah, they're probably not searching for the more positive side, meaning that how can I be a better spouse? How can I be a better partner? They're probably searching something else. Why
Hmm.
is he like this? Why is she like that? Right. And it's going
Exactly.
to have a negative twist to it because it's easier to complain
Yep.
than it is to change it, right? So when we look at things like that, then, and the men that you work with, what do you find to be a common obstacle or obstacles that they're facing when they're trying to create healthy relationships that maybe they didn't see or
Mhm.
that they want to actually have?
First thing that comes to mind, Taryn, is their resistance to look within themselves. And you kind of said it about blame. You blame the other person. Oh, she's annoying. What can I do to deal with this annoying woman or whatever? And they put the focus outward. And we can do that forever till the cows come home and not get anywhere because blame doesn't do anybody any good. And when you're not looking at yourself, chances are you're not really open to change. So the first thing, I work with usually is being self-reflective, and with that is starting with self-compassion. And that's something that we're not taught, man. I mean, it's not in our culture. I had to learn it. I mean, I was kind of aware of it, over the years, but about 8 or 9 years, oh, I'll say about 9 years ago, I was in Seattle and I did a workshop with this woman named Kristen Neff, Neff. She wrote a book called Self-Compassion: The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And that absolutely changed my world because a lot of us men are full of shame, and how, like how we're being depicted now as men are bad, women are great, and that only just digs deeper into our shame. And, I have the shame of, being infidelity, or being cheating on my wife and my girlfriends, and, all the shame in between. And when we can start with recognizing that everybody has something and that we're all going through something, self-compassion is about treating ourselves as we would someone we love and care about. And with that comes forgiveness, forgiving others and forgiving yourself first and foremost. And it's also understanding that there's a sense of community when you're suffering, because everyone on this planet has suffered at some level. We're all going through something. And it's to understand through self-compassion that, hey, I'm not alone in this. There's other people going through this too. And then the third element of it is really about being mindful that, man, I'm going through something right now. I'm suffering, and to be mindful of taking care of yourself, to soothe yourself. So we start with that, and that is a game changer. And it can be a bit of a challenge because, like I said, we don't have people modeling this for us, and it's a whole new way of being. Yet I do this meditation with them as a guided meditation to take them through a self-compassion process, and it blows their mind every time because they realize that, yeah, I don't do that at all. And when they find a way to do that, a process where they can take care of themselves, that's a great place to start, so that you're feeling good about you, you're okay with you. It's like me having to be alone. I'm okay with me. And now I can take that to the next relationship. And when we feel good about ourselves, we're going to feel a lot better about going out and meeting other people and being in a relationship. But when we have all this internalized shame and guilt and all the crap that we put on ourselves, we're going to take that out in the world. And then, of course, it's going to look not going to look very good or very hopeful to be in a relationship, and especially if you're acting out with those subconscious internal struggles, right?
That reminds me of the peer group, if you remember, that I told you about in the group chat,
Oh, yeah.
where they mention that there are, what they would do is they would do the blame. They would say that, okay, there isn't any good women in my city.
Yeah,
And
the whole city.
right. And then now it's to the point where there isn't any good women in my country. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, fair enough. Mars isn't too far from being,
Mars
you
is
know,
next.
Mars is next, right? So it also reminds me of like the sci-fi movies where people would just launch off into space and find their one, like Total Recall and all these sci-fi movies.
Right,
But
right.
in all seriousness, sometimes when I listen to them, it's like, this is what I'm going through. I know some of my issues, but I'm not going to correct it. What I'm going to do is I am going to remain the same, complain, double down, and say that everyone else has to change to meet me here. And sometimes when I speak to some of these men in this group, I say that, well, that's perfect. You can do that. But on the other side is that women or whomever, could be men
Mhm.
too,
Right.
they're going to say, do I deal with this, or do I just go find something else that can meet me halfway? Right?
Hmm.
Because some people don't want to go the entire distance, especially when the person is telling you they're not going to change and you have to accept all their bad behavior. And you also mentioned that sometimes that men get shamed into some of the things that they feel.
Hmm.
What do you then think is what can men do to have better models of healthy relationships and not feel the shame of maybe what society is putting onto them?
Well, that's tough. I mean, it really depends on where they are spending time and who, if they know someone, if you're young enough, like you have friends, parents, and you see that they get along really well, those are people that you want to aspire to be like. You certainly don't want to compare it to what you see on social media because everybody puts their happy face out there. They're showing the whole family, they're showing the love. And, I'm guilty of that too, but we all are. And if that's what you're comparing yourself to, then you're setting yourself up for some disappointment because you don't see the other side, right? Um, so it's really important to have, regardless of who's modeling this for you, it's having taking time to have clarity, to get clarity about what do I want? What are the qualities do I want in a relationship, in a woman, in a man, whatever it is? What do I want? And sometimes that's the hardest thing for us to do. And what's easy to do is think about all the things you don't want. And when you can do that, well, I don't want a woman that's superficial. Okay, well, then I want a woman then you go to the opposite. I want a woman that's more humble or whatever. So I do an exercise where draw a line down the middle of a page. You have what I want, what I don't want on one side and the other. And when you put out what you don't want, put the opposite on the other side. And that's a way to start to realize what I really want. And then don't accept anything else. Go for it. And put yourself in a place where you're going to find that. If you think you're going to find that in the club, well, I don't know. You might. But if all you're doing are clubs and, there's a lot of stuff going on in the clubs and you think you're going to find that type of person there, well, maybe, maybe not. But chances are you want to go to where you think that person's going to be. And so when you're clear about what you want, then you go for it and you find the environment where you're going to find somebody like that.
That's such a beautiful thing to do. And I always tell people to do that because it's
Mhm.
easier to say what we don't like.
Yeah.
Give
We
me
go, we,
everything that you don't like, right?
yeah, we
And
go to
then
the
when they write
negative
it
right
down,
away.
you go to the
Mhm.
negative, right?
Mhm.
And what's funny is that they can, until you stop them, they'll keep listing.
And there's no reason not to, right? They're just
There
going to do
isn't,
it.
right?
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, the opposite is true. And because when you start off, I think sometimes with some people, when they say that, okay, this is what I want, and what I want is that I want to be able to have someone that is compassionate, that's understanding, that is whatever that looks like for you. And I always found it interesting that people find it difficult to say that. Tell me the type of person you want. Bill, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
like they struggle to say positive things about what they want. Why do you think it's easier for people to say, I can give you 100 things I don't like or I don't want, but when you say, okay, what is it that you want out of this? They struggle to identify it.
I think a lot of it is just how our brain works. Most of us go to the negative right away. And the reason for that is our survival. Like we have to be aware. So, we got to be on the lookout. And so we have to be aware of what's negative out there. And we lose sight of where the positive could be. And so it's a matter of training, that subconscious behavior of looking for the danger, the negative, and overriding that with feeding it the positive. And that takes a lot of repetition, a lot of reinforcement. We can't just have one thought and think, oh, we're done. We have to repeat it over and over and over and over and over again so that that subconscious behavior of being on the alert shifts to being on the looking for the positive. And so that becomes your subconscious behavior, and that's going to that's going to control how you behave in the world. Does that make sense?
It does, because when I now reflect on that and I put like people in it, that totally makes sense because they're looking at it from their perspective, and their perspective may be skewed
Yeah,
by whatever measurement, right? Do you then think that we sometimes hold on too much or too tightly to our past trauma, maybe, or past relationships, and it then hinders us from finding future happiness?
absolutely. And that's usually the reason why we've had, whether it's the trauma of our childhood, and the tricky thing about the childhood trauma is if a child has some sort of idea of what happened and can understand it at least on some level, they're pretty resilient. We can get through it, and so we don't dwell on it. It's just because I feel like I had a relatively happy childhood, even through the traumas that I went through. You so that's where it can be tricky. So, and I'm going to touch on that in a minute, but go back to it. But as far as past relationships, usually what's happened in your childhood plays out in your relationship. And so you may think it was the past relationship, but what it is really goes back to that trauma you went through as a kid. And if we don't have that awareness, we're going to keep repeating the same patterns. And then we say to ourselves, oh man, why are all women this way? And why aren't there any good women in my city, in my country, in my world? Because we are not changing what's going on inside of us. And so, yeah, we're going to take that baggage when we don't have the awareness. We're going to take that baggage to our next relationship. And if we don't do anything about it, it's going to repeat itself. And so that's where it gets all convoluted because you're afraid, well, my ex cheated on me, so then you're going to cheat on me. So you're always super hyper vigilant, looking for, clues that show me that she might be cheating on me. And that again, and it's coming from that negative perspective versus looking at yourself and saying, why am I feeling so insecure? And working on my own insecurities and even being vulnerable with the woman or the person you're with to say, um, my ex, my ex cheated on me, and I'm super sensitive about things that may make me think you're cheating on me, and I know that's something that I have to work on, and I need you to have some grace around it and be as transparent as you possibly can, so we can build trust together, that kind of thing. So that's just an example of how those old relationships can carry on to the past, to the future, and or the present. And it takes a lot of courage to commit to doing some sort of work around your past relationships or your childhood trauma. And it could be as simple as, reading blogs or podcasts, listening to like Men on the Path to Love, it could be reading books, it could be going to therapy, it could be hiring a coach. Yet if you're struggling in a relationship and same things keep showing up, then you really got to look at yourself and whatever that looks like for you, make the effort to do it. That shows your strength and courage to move on so you can be your best self in relationship.
And then I wonder how many people, because of the guilt, maybe the shame of their own behaviors, if they're self-aware enough, that it prevents them from then sabotaging future relationships. And I share that because someone who was an acquaintance, someone that I knew online, she had a history of bad relationships. So when she got into a relationship with someone that, according to her, was pretty decent, she began to realize that she was sabotaging the relationship.
Hmm.
And she ultimately divorced this person. And since the divorce, I kid you not, Bill, in the last 6 months, because we follow each other on social media,
Hmm.
she dated John. I'm just giving up names. She's like, John. She's like, I found my guy. This is what he's the one.
Hmm.
2 months later, scrubbed the entire social media. There's no more pictures of John. I found Chris. He's my
Hmm.
guy. 1 month later,
He's the one.
yeah, scrubbed it again. Third guy. And I'm thinking 3 guys in 6 months where you said this is the one, right? All because, according to her, she's self-sabotaging it. How what are your thoughts on that type of behavior and why that happens?
I think part of it is subconscious behavior that we're playing out, she's playing out, that she's somewhat aware of because she knows somewhere inside of her that she's self-sabotaging. Um, so, that's a good start because at least she's aware that that's happening. And it may be easier for her to say that I'm self-sabotaging and then it happens versus, well, what am I going to do about it? You got to take action. You got to look at yourself. If I'm self-sabotaging, then I have to look at me. And if I realize what I'm doing, it could be my insecurities, it could be my past traumas. It could be a lot of things that are getting in the way and that are causing me to self-sabotage. And when I can come to terms with that and then be honest with myself and move forward, then I'm opening the door for the one because it's real. But if you're catching yourself self-sabotaging, and you're not doing anything about it, then it's going to keep happening. Kind of like what you were saying earlier.
You mentioned social media, and I wonder how many people turn to social media to say they've found the one or to proclaim their relationship because maybe deep down they know at that moment it's not as great as it could be.
Well, it's to make it look great in the public eye and to all the friends. And, again, it's putting out that happy side of life. And maybe they're feeling that way in that moment and they want to share it with the world to say, see, I can be happy too, and putting themselves out there. Um, and yet only to discover that we really didn't give this enough time, to develop. And saying something is, I mean, I've said it before, she's the one, and 3 divorces later, I did find the one. It just took me a while.
Looking back, when you look back how far you've come, Bill,
Hmm.
and now you're in a relationship 16 plus years,
Hmm.
how proud of yourself are you?
Deep breath. Yes, I am proud of myself, and I have to remind myself on the daily. And one of my self-compassion practices is every morning I write 10 things that I love about myself. And part of that is I love how I love. I love how I love in my relationship. And I also acknowledge the part of me that struggles. I love that too. I love my crooked teeth. I love my bald head. It's like all the things about me. And so that I'm saying that to say that yes, I'm very proud. And how we really see how far we come, because we're never as far along as we would like to be. We always think we should be further along, oh, I should be in a better place in my career or whatever, relationship. That's always the case. So how do we measure our progress? Well, if I look back to day one, from my teenage years and overlapping girlfriends to my first marriage to where I am today, whoo, man, you've come a long way, brother. And so I have to remember that. And I always realize that it's where I've been is how I see my progress versus where I think I should be. So yes,
Do you
I'm proud.
think, and I told you it's very inspiring and it's amazing because I don't think, and I'll get your input on this, I don't think we celebrate the success as much as we acknowledge the failure. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I think it's going back to we navigate towards the negative, and and there's always something I could say, oh, well, I could be a better husband doing this and that, so we don't really acknowledge ourselves as being a good husband. And the proof is in the pudding. If she says you're a great husband, then trust her that you are, and take it in and love yourself and realize, look, we're doing the best we can. And I want to say, we as men have been conditioned a certain way, and even though men and women, I feel like we have the same abilities to connect. It's our conditioning that's gotten in the way. And for men to make themselves vulnerable, to be able to talk the way I was talking earlier, and to show empathy, and to kind of let go of our egos, that's a scary place for a lot of men to be. And so I have a lot of empathy around that because, my dad was emotionally, stagnant, and I had to learn, that was my model. And I had to learn to shift that because I was pretty stoic and wouldn't share my emotions and stuffed it all in. And when I can acknowledge how scary that is and acknowledge how much courage and strength it requires to do it, I always encourage, their partners, their women, or whoever, to have grace around that because we've been conditioned a certain way. So we need a little bit of break. We're trying, and as long as you're trying, you're taking steps, even if it's 1% every day, that's progress, and that's showing that you are trying and that you're not going to change overnight. Change is a process. It takes time.
I grew up the same way, and then I read the book, The Five Love Languages, and
Oh yeah.
words of affirmation became my thing, right? Just trying to doing a good job. I'm proud of you, things like that. Because in my childhood, I didn't have it. And then I remember there was I forget where I read it, but there's that connection between a lot of children who didn't grow up hearing one of the five, and then they grew up as adults and they really wanted. It's like the person who grew up poor and gift giving is their thing because now they
Mm,
have the resources and the money to receive and to give. And I
yeah.
look back now, and to your point about the conditioning of men, how men have to be stoic providers. So there's
Yeah.
active service, gift giving, right? I am
Hmm.
a man, I'm able to do it. I wonder how many men, if you were to ask them honestly and sit back and say, has anyone ever told you, good job? I'm proud of you. I'm happy of you. I wonder how many men would say that, you know what? That's all I wanted to hear. I would love to embrace that because it's one thing to try to love someone one way, and it's
Hmm.
another thing to get the type of love that you want. How do you think we can grow and learn to identify the type of love that we want and then work towards obtaining it?
Well, I think it just goes back to that recognizing what you don't want and finding the other side of that because um, it's really easy not to know. And especially if we're trying to change and go against the grain of our conditioning, and to even say, to be vulnerable enough to say, especially to your spouse or partner, I really would like for you to acknowledge me sometimes because I feel like I do a lot and all I get is a lot of complaints. And it would really be helpful for me if you could acknowledge the good stuff that I do. And that's saying it in a nice way versus you're always bitching at me and why can't you, like, no, that's not going to land as well. So you want to, it's really, reflecting inside and saying, what do I really need here? And, I think about it a lot of times, like I had a case where like this guy's wife was gone all day and he was trying to text her, hadn't heard from her. And finally she comes home in kind of, late evening. And he says, like, where the hell have you been? I've been calling you all day. You never, and he's yelling, screaming. And she's like, and, and I'm like, well, I understand you're being upset, right? Of course. But to say, hey, I missed you today and I was wondering where you were. Like, who talks like that? No, we don't. We go right for the jugular because that's the easy place to go. That puts her on the spotlight. It takes no responsibility for him. So he does not make himself vulnerable. He only beats her up verbally. And so where does that leave you? With a hot mess. And if we can just pause a minute to say, what's really going on here? I love this woman and I missed her and I'm scared. Maybe she's out seeing somebody else. And I just missed you and want to know where you were. And that's going to land a lot easier than the other way. And if we can learn to accept talking not exactly like that, but having that intention behind the words that we say. There's a thing I say before anything you say or do is understand four things: that I love you, I respect you, I care about you, and I want you to feel safe in this relationship. And when you can filter whatever you're going to say or do with those four things, then it's going to come out a lot better. You're going to be more vulnerable, and chances are you're going to get through it a lot easier. And it doesn't mean you can't have a boundary. It doesn't mean you can't be angry. It doesn't mean you can have, you can have all the feelings you want and be pissed off. Yet when you communicate, do it in those with those four things in mind. Because the more we beat each other up, guess what happens? The relationship starts to pull apart. And one of the worst things that can happen in a relationship is drifting apart.
How important then is the communication in the relationship?
So important. It's so key. It's one of the main issues, and for me, usually communications is the easiest fix because if you love that person, you want to be with them, and that's like the foundation, then correcting communication styles, that's a lot easier than if you say have a needs conflict. And that's the other main issue is needs conflict. And I need this, and can you give it to me or not? And if you can, great. If not, then we have an unsolvable problem, and then we have to decide: do we just deal with the unsolvable problem that's what it is, or is that enough to end the relationship? But going back to communications, that is the key, man. And when we can understand each other's communication style, and understand like how do you want it to be delivered, and you honor that with each other, man, you're going to get a lot further and have a more long-lasting relationship. I often say like if there are two really like more assertive people or aggressive people, like they yell at each other and they're screaming and yelling, and then 15 minutes later they're having makeup sex. Well, that tends to work, right? That's just their style. They're just hotheads, but they love each other and that's it. And then you have two more introverted people. They tend to, communicate similarly and they tend to work out. When you have one that's more aggressive and the other is more passive, that's when you have a problem. Well, if he's a yeller and she's more passive, then it's going to feel aggressive to her. Um, so it's understanding how do you want me to tell you how I feel? Like, how do you want me to ask you or confront you about something, so that you're delivering it in a way that they feel safe in the relationship? And that's so important because you might be saying the right words, but if you're not saying it, if it's the body language or the tone, it could change everything. So you see how communication is really key in a relationship.
Will always say that communication is what ties together all the other pillars of a
Mhm.
healthy, successful relationship, whether it's intimacy, whether it's emotional awareness, compatibility. You have to talk about these things. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes what happens within us is that we assume our words are landing in the way that we want them to land,
Right, right.
right? And they don't. So you can tell someone, say that, hey, I made this dinner for you. Do you want it? Right? Or I made this dinner for you as a nice gesture. Most people are going to say, wow, he or she made dinner for me. And then you're eating it and you're like, well, I didn't like it. Now you're thinking, I'm just being honest, but this
Right,
person took their time, energy, and effort, and all you found was something wrong with it. Not, you know what, thank you for
right,
this. I
right.
appreciate it. There's a way to say it. Why do you think that misstep happens where they're trying to communicate and this person has all the right intentions, but it just comes out the wrong way?
Yeah, because they probably don't have the skills to do it. They don't, or the awareness of how it may land. I had on one of my episodes, I talked about the love languages and gift giving was one, and it was it was his girlfriend's birthday, and he went out and got these courtside tickets to the 76ers, man, and he was so excited. We're going to see the Sixers, baby. And she was like, I don't care about basketball. Like he spent a lot of money on it. It felt like a great gesture on his part, but he didn't see her. And when you can think about what that gesture could land, and if you do it one time, then it's an opportunity to learn and say, oh, well, next time, now I know. But if it's repeated, then you're not getting the message. And it's so important to really understand how it may land with them. And if you don't know, ask. That's simple. Yeah.
I look back on some of my relationship past in my 20s.
Hmm.
And when I was looking to ask those questions, I'm trying to describe what I felt. In a sense, it was like, why should I be asking? Right? The gesture itself is enough.
Hmm.
But now that as I got older and more experienced and my training, it's you're supposed to ask before the gesture,
Hmm. It's helpful.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, did you experience that, or do you know some of the men who experience that where they ask after the gesture instead of asking before the gesture?
Sure. That happens all the time. And another thing that happens too, Taryn, is I can't tell you how many women say, well, he should know that. He should already know that. And I'm like, how is he supposed to know it if you haven't told him? Well, he should just know. Well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, should know. Maybe you mentioned it at some point, but if he ain't giving it to you, then he doesn't know. And it may feel, like she wants that surprise or whatever it is that he should know. Well, you're going to be a lot more surprised when he doesn't know, and you're going to be disappointed. You're setting yourself up. So don't do that. Don't don't put that don't put that on, anybody to say that they should know, unless you've told them 100 million times. And even
Yeah,
then, they may.
I had two people. I had a couple tell me that they're like, well, because they're I was speaking to because I know both of them as friends,
Hmm.
and well, I knew the woman first, and then I know her husband, but I became better friends with him, and they're the same way. And then I asked them just like, oh yes, I'm like, but how do they have to know? I was like, it's safe to assume the following: abuse in a relationship is wrong, infidelity is wrong, stealing is wrong, right? But to some people, and one of my exes, she told me about this, is that some people feel whether they're single or in a relationship, they can post whatever they want on social media,
Oh,
however that they're dressed, right?
hmm.
To a lot of other people, they're like, when you're single, who cares? You're only impacting you, right? But when you're in a relationship, especially one that you see a future with, everything that you post is a reflection on yourself, that person, and your relationship,
Yep.
right? That's not an assumption, right? Because if you were to survey 1,000 people, you're not going to get the same answer 1,000 times. The
Hmm.
abuse, you most likely would. The infidelity, the stealing, like financial abuse, you most likely would. So these are things that people have to navigate. And I always found it interesting that some people will say that, to your point, right? You should know, but how? They're not you, right? And their experiences may be different. What do you think the disconnect is between people just saying that, Bill, I understand that we talked about is what you don't want versus what you want, but why do they still hold on to the belief that you should know, regardless of me telling you?
It sounds like they have their own agenda, and they have these expectations, and that's one of the most dangerous things to do is have expectations because you're setting yourself up for disappointment. If you can be more neutral about it and say, "Oh, well, he didn't know. Let me tell him this time." And, I appreciate your gesture. And that's a great, 76ers courtside. That's great. It's just not my thing. And maybe next time it could be, going to a show or something, right? So yeah, it kind of it sounds a little bit narcissistic, when you have that agenda of, well, he should know without me communicating, then they're not taking responsibility for themselves. They're putting it all on the other person. So it could be the blame or it could be you should know. And that's just how you going to live up to that? You don't, unless it's explicit, or like I said, if it's told over and over, then maybe yeah, you should have known because she did tell me that 20 times today. Um, but it's understanding that if you have those expectations and he should know then to look inside yourself and say, well, what's my role here? What's my part?
You should know. You should also like what I like, right?
Good
Dislike
luck with that.
what I like. Like my girlfriend, we both love comedy shows, but we love two different comedians.
Right.
And we got 3 tickets to comedy shows. I was excited. She was like, because it's a mutual
Hmm.
hobby where it's a passion. We both love it.
Sure.
So she's like, okay, so these are the comedians we're going to pick. She picks 3 comedians who I'm not fans of.
Mm.
Right? So I sat there and I was like, oh, geez, man. Let me get one out of the 3. That's the compromise, right? So I share that because you can have 2 people who love something mutually together, but there's a component of it that someone loves a little bit more and you would love a little bit less. So when
Mhm.
she chose those 3 people, I was like, okay, the third person I'm a fan of. The first 2, not so much, but the people that's a part of the comedy show I'm fan of.
Mm.
So it worked out, right? Like the first comedian, the second comedian that comes up.
Right.
But we talked about that, right? I can see, to your point, the courtside tickets. It's like if I were to bring her to a sporting event,
Hmm.
she will be happy because I'm happy,
Hmm.
but you're going to know she's out of place.
Got it.
Right? And I
Hmm.
think some people miss that feeling like you're taking someone who's happy to be with you, they're not necessarily happy to be in their environment and they're going to stick out. And 2.5 hours being at something that you don't really like is a long time, right, Bill?
Yeah. Feels like forever. Yeah. Well, I think you hit on it. Compromise, some people have different opinions about that in relationship. Like, that's that's part of the key too is, yeah, I talk about, being honest with yourself and your spouse or partner. So say if you want to go out to eat, and I use this example a lot, and you want Italian and she wants Indian, and you really don't really want Indian, and so you're kind of stuck here. Well, you could be at a standstill and not go out to eat at all, or you could have an argument about it or whatever. Or you could go and you're sulking the whole time because you really wanted, the Italian or whatever. Um, and the point is to say, what's my goal here? What do I really want here? And it's kind of like what you were saying. It's like, well, I want to spend time with her, and I'm okay with Italian this time. And let her know I'm okay with Italian this time, and next time, let's do Indian. So that you're letting her know that you'd rather have Indian and you're okay with Italian versus, well, no, we don't have to go there because you don't want to go there. No, 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 it's okay, and that whole thing, and then you end up being miserable. So it's really important to just communicate again what your preference is, and if she wants to go because she knows that you really are into it and makes you happy, that's great. Or she could say, hey, why don't you go with one of your friends and maybe you and I can go to the next show. And you can see how easy that is. Those are easy fixes, yet it all comes out sideways, right? And then you got this hot mess going on. I mean, I
The
laugh,
war starts, Bill. The
I
war
laugh,
starts.
but it ain't funny when it's happening. And yeah, you're exactly right. And so, yeah, it's a challenge, yet it makes all the difference.
Yeah, it reminds me of that TikTok video. Maybe it's on elsewhere as well, where these 2 people they're on a date and they're sitting in the car, and the person pulls up to the restaurant. They're like, "Okay, you ready?" And she's like, "Oh, I thought we were going to Waffle House." He's like, "No, I want to go to this restaurant." So there's no compromise. They both sat in the car, recording each other. I'm hoping it was a skit. Recording each other to give both sides, right? And you see the guy he's talking, he's like, could you believe she's not coming out of the car because she wants to go to Waffle House? And then she's saying that, could you believe he brought me here and not to the Waffle House? What kind of man does this? And I'm watching this and I'm like, you guys could just step in and then the next time you guys go to wherever,
Right.
right?
It's
So
that
it's interesting you say that. So let me ask you as we close, if you had,
easy.
I'm going to give you 3 wishes. Aladdin's lamp.
Hmm.
What are 3 things you wish people knew about expectations in a relationship and why?
Well, first and foremost, that expectations can lead to disappointment. Imagine a kid that wanted this thing for Christmas and expected it, and didn't get it, and then, well, I wanted to whatever. Same kind of thing. And expectations without communication then leaves you out of the picture, right? Out of the equation. And then having those expectations without communicating what your needs are, then again, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And a third about expectations, hmm, um, maybe I'm drawing a blank on that one. But you can see, I think my point is it sets you up basically for disappointment no matter what you do. And I wish people would be able to communicate what they feel and what they need. That's the secret ingredient. I feel, fill in the blank, I need, versus you need to do this, you need to do that. No, take responsibility for yourself. I need to blah blah blah, and I mean I feel a certain way, and then I need, and that's fill in the blank. I feel I need, coming from that I statement, uh, takes responsibility for yourself. And even if you're stating your expectation, I'm expecting us to go to the restaurant after this show. I want to make sure we're on board with that. Then there you go. You communicated it, and then I get to decide, oh, yeah, that's your expectation. I'm either going to give it to you or I can't give it to you. At least I know what it is.